Welcome to episode 1 of Pour and Tell. I'm your host, John the Cigar Surgeon McTavish, here as always with my co-host, Jiunn Liu. Jiunn, what's going on, brother?
Doing good, man. Sunday morning, because this is when we're recording. So I got my nice cup of um, single origin Colombian coffee here.
Nice.
So
Nice. I'm with you. Every morning, of course, starts with coffee. I mean, I could give or take breakfast, but coffee is the way that every day starts for me.
oh, for sure.
So first off, this segment we're talking about a pour and tell segment. So I'll kick it off. I've got something pretty recent to talk about. I was just at one of the local breweries last night, 88 Brewing. There's kind of been this explosion of microbreweries in Calgary. I think they made some changes to the laws a few years ago to make it a little bit easier for entrants. So as a result, I think we've got something like 15 or 17 new breweries in Calgary within the last couple of years. So I popped by their tap room. They've got an attached sitting area where you can, get a pour and have a drink and enjoy the table. And they've got this cool attached pizza place. So they kind of do this thing where they make the pizza fresh. This pizza place makes the pizza fresh, and then they just run out of dough at a certain point. And when they run out of dough, they're done. But it's these like giant sort of Brooklyn style pizza. Anyways, it's cool, but we're really here to talk about beverages, not pizza. So I tried to kind of do their whole range because, whatever. So I kind of did, what was I doing? 6-ounce pours? I think it was 6-ounce pours rather than 10-ounce pours because, I don't want to get drunk. The kind of,
Yeah, that's never.
no, I mean, I want to, that's kind of the nice thing about flights, right? I can have a flight and I can get a couple 4 or 5 flavors without getting blasted. But the standouts for me, they had this no bake. So no bake was an Nanaimo Bar Imperial Stout. I think it was like 8.2%. Had kind of really balanced coffee, malty, sweet notes. You know how sometimes Imperial Stouts can either be like too coffee or too sweet?
Mm-hmm.
So I found that this one was really, really balanced for me. So, and of course the ABV was, reasonable. I know some people don't like drinking up in the 8s or plus, but 8.2% to me that's pretty sessionable.
And I think it's hard. Like nowadays, if you're looking for a craft beer that doesn't touch that 8 range, like I mean, in around California where I'm at in San Francisco Bay Area, like I mean, especially within the hazy IPA craze, like you're looking at drinking some 8-9ers, like for sure, especially during like the cooler months. So.
I mean, it's, whatever. You can drink whatever you want. You can drink just Pilsners if you want. It's just if you want to get
Sure.
into that porter stout kind of category, you're going to be in the high 7s, low 8s minimum.
Yeah.
And
Comes with the territory.
yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Moving, of course, to IPAs, because everyone's got to have an IPA these days. They had a few, and there were interesting expressions, and I would say that they weren't really going for what's popular. They're going for interesting, which I appreciate. So they had this, they call it the Liquid Diet. It's an IPA with turmeric in it, which is kind of a yeah, it's a funky combination. And like I said, they kind of are playing around with different whatever, and really interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's really an IPA with just some interesting flavor to it that wasn't standard IPA flavors without getting too crazy with adjuncts. And then lastly, Night Gallery, which is just a New England style pale ale. And man, it was just, when you have like a really good either IPA or, pale ale, and it's got that really great juicy, I don't know how to describe it. You know what I mean? Like that juiciness to it.
Yeah. It's like almost, for me, it's almost like, I kind of have this same thing with cigars sometimes. Once in a very blue moon, especially for cigars. It happens more so with like hazy IPAs, where when you're drinking an IPA, it makes you feel like you're drinking just straight up juice, right? Like whereas a lot of IPAs before the haze craze, a lot of people are just like because you're basically breathing in a mouth full of bitterness and hops. But yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. I mean, I like a really intense hoppy IPA as well. But I think for me, what's really, really nice is, like I said, is that super juiciness. So I've got another one to talk about, but it's quite lengthy because I was at a whiskey tasting a couple weeks ago. I'll let you get in some words here about what you've been pouring and enjoying lately?
Yeah, a couple of on the beer front. I have a couple of things for beer, a thing for bourbon. So on the beer front, there's a local brewery. John's up in Canada, like Calgary.
That's right.
Yep.
Oh yeah,
And then yeah, and I'm in San Francisco Bay Area. So San Francisco, Oakland, some of the landmarks that people probably know about. So within SF Bay Area, um, there is a brewery called Fieldwork. So it originally started at Berkeley, but now there's about five of the locations that they opened up. So they're slowly, but um, slowly expanding, and they're a great brewery. So a lot of what they do is hazies. I think going from fruited IPAs to like sessionable IPAs to the recent like brute IPAs, which I would even call it a fad, is probably just not going to happen. But I think hazies are definitely here to stay. Captures quite a bit of wide audience with a lot of like juicier hops and yeasts that they put in. So um, one that I really liked is called Pulp. So Pulp utilizes Citra hops. So it's like a near 7% IPA, 6.9% IPA, and it's great. Like it's one of those beers in which it doesn't drink like a 7%, but you have a few of those that'll knock you on your ass. A lot of citrus tones, a lot of stone fruit. Loved it. And then another one that I got from Fieldwork again is called the Super St. Thomas. So this 9.6%, basically Imperial IPA, right? So this guy, uh, I believe they brew it once a year. And this was interesting. Like I typically don't like Imperial IPAs because oftentimes I find the increase in alcohol to be either like it could be kind of soapy for me or a bit too sweet. I thought this one did a good job of like having it well balanced, not having that alcohol bite that Imperial IPAs could be so known for, and to be a bit off-putting.
I think just
Uh,
jumping in for a second. I think I
yeah.
mean I'm definitely with you. I don't mind like we're talking about stouts earlier. I don't mind the increase in ABV if it comes with flavor, right? Like the whole point
Mhm.
of an imperial stout is you can't get those flavors without going the ABV. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with an IPA pushing 8%, 9%, or above. It seems like it's kind of for the sake of alcohol.
Yeah, it's hard because like I mean, let's be honest here. Like, John and I, you and I, when we drink uh, alcohol, we drink it because it tastes
Right.
good, right? We're not there to open up something and be like, "Man, I had such a shitty day. I just want to get smashed
Yeah, I mean
and,
that's
forget about
definitely
the day."
the I think the pathway to having a problem, and I prefer to not have a problem.
Yeah, we are alcohol
That's right.
enthusiasts, right? We're not like boozers. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So with that said, uh especially with Imperial IPAs, it's really hard, like because you're almost like, for me, most Imperial IPAs that I've had, you're just almost saying like, dude, drink this to get really smashed
Right.
really fast, right? But I felt like within this Super St. Thomas, it kept it masked the alcohol really well, which is not easy to do in my opinion. uh Within, I don't know how to brew beer, don't get me wrong, but I know how to taste beer, right? So within the beers that I tasted, most of them are really boozy with Imperial IPA.
Now,
So
just I guess building on that, do you find it all? Do you find you changing your portion sizes at all when, like, whether it's an imperial IPA or whether it's a imperial stout or whatever? Do you find that you change your portion sizes, or do you find like whether it's a 16 ounce or 20 ounce, you just pour the same amount?
so with these beers, I don't have a ton of time to go to actual breweries and taste as much anymore. But I picked these up as cans. So these are, I believe, 16-ounce cans. So by the time I finished this one, I was, legitimately pretty buzzed. So I drink the whole 16-ounce can. I'm not about to leave it, pour half in the refrigerator, that stuff.
We're
So
not animals.
yeah, exactly. So um, so yeah, so great beers. I mean, San Francisco Bay Area is interesting for beers because I think if you think about beers, most people kind of know about like Russian River, like Pliny the Elder. I think if not one of the originators of like West Coast, hot pininess kind of a beer that's out there. So so it's really nice to see uh, this juicy kind of variant coming through as well. Um, so yeah, another thing that I had on the non-beer front, I had something else that our viewers will kind of get to know is John is definitely, and on the whiskey front, you're way more towards like that Scotch side of things, right?
I'd say that's fair.
Uh, Whereas I'm more towards the bourbon and Japanese whiskey side of things. So
Although I feel like when it comes to Japanese whiskey, I feel like we're both pretty
mm,
aggressively in the enthusiast category because I mean I've definitely gone way overboard on the Japanese whiskey collection, and I think if I go to a I don't know what you call it. It's not a tap room, but you go to a place that's serving. If the price is reasonable, I'm probably more likely to pick up a Japanese whiskey pour than I would be, say, a Scotch whiskey pour.
yes, and we could probably do an episode just on this topic right here, of basically, I agree with you, man. Like the popularity of whiskey is insane. I mean, you're talking about Japanese whiskey in which it has gained massive amounts of popularity, and at this point, in terms of the retail pricing, and also talking about fair market pricing, it's astronomical with a lot of these bottles. So, given that, and more importantly, given my enjoyment that I have so much for Japanese whiskey, if I find that at a bar, I would love to drink it at a good price. Right. Always the caveat is if I can find it at a good price. Right. Because I kind of feel like that's one of the reasons why I've shifted towards the last couple of years drinking so much bourbon, because bourbon is still, in my opinion, at a really good price point for the flavors that it develops. So I'm trying to, a part of me is I'm definitely a hoarder of alcohol and cigars.
Collector.
Collector. So I've been buying a lot of bourbon the last couple of years, just because you know I, I feel like it's within the price point in the delivery of flavors. It's really well matched. It's a very competitive price point for that. So, anyways, yeah, but with Japanese whiskey, man, like, excuse me, even if you could find it, um, like, you're rarely gonna find it at a good price, unless if you around here, unless if you go to like a big box store, right? Like a Total Wine and More, and then on an off chance you get lucky, or you get to know the guys that work there, and they tell you when stock comes in, and that's when they actually sell it to you at MSRP. If not, you're gonna see it at a lot of mom and pops where it's gonna be marked up to 300%
At least.
at least.
Which,
So,
I'm okay. I mean, I can understand like whether it's a bar or retail serving location, or whether it's a store. I understand they got to make a profit, but I do think there's a cutoff. When you like, I'm sure you've seen this. You go to wherever and you're like, oh, Japanese whiskey. Let me look what a pour is, and they're charging like $15, and you could go out and buy the bottle for 80. And it's like, listen, like your markup is like, I get that people are going to pay that, but I'm less likely when I know what the cost of that bottle is, and I know that what your pour cost is like 20% of the cost of a bottle.
mhm.
That's not going to inspire me to put an order in, I don't think.
Yeah, I totally agree. Um, and a part of me is like, I know we're kind of totally going off tangent, but I'll get to the actual whiskey I've been drinking. A part of me is I think you and I are both lucky enough at this point in which we collected over the last few years and have such a good, enjoyable stash at home, that you need to give me us, like, for me, I'll speak for myself. You need to give me a very compelling reason to be at a whiskey bar and have a pour that I don't know, that I don't have. Right? I don't get me wrong. I don't have a lot of bottles in my shelf space, and as compared to most good whiskey bars, but I have enough to know what I like. So if you're gonna offer me a neat pour or something over ice, well, actually just neat, with a side of water, it has to be something that's special, right? Um, if it's like a let's say typical hibiki perfect harmony, like, dude, I'll wait until my big box store gets it, and if I run out, I'll go buy a
Yeah.
bottle at like $60. So, anyways, in terms of the actual whiskey that I was drinking, so it's a bourbon called Bell Mead. So that's the brand. So Bell Mead in general, they do a wide array of things. And the particular bottle that I keep going back to is they have a 9-year-old Sherry Cask bourbon. I personally really like Sherry Cask. So
Samesies.
that, yeah, like that second maturation of Sherry Cask, for the most part, I'm going to be very intrigued, and I will most likely buy a bottle if it's at a fair price. Um, so within this bottle, so I bought this bottle maybe, oh man, maybe like half a year ago, for like $80, and I love this bottle, man. Like it, there's certain bottles of whiskey in which I gauge, in which like when I go back to it and I could consistently taste the same profile, and as a result of that, I consistently like it the same. That tells me something. I mean, granted, some days palates are off and whatnot. And it's not going to taste exactly the same as you remember it last time. But within this particular one, I mean, there's just so much. Uh, like the best way I could describe this whiskey is it tastes like a cinnamon apple pie,
Oh, damn.
right? Like, yeah, like it's cinnamon, it's green apples, it's that creamy like pastry texture, like a bready texture to it. Um, so everything within those flavors and the sweetness of an apple pie is all kind of condensed. I don't know, blended and filtered and went straight into the bottle. So, man, I love this stuff. Like every time I have it, I enjoy it. I keep going back to it. And I think the proof wise, I think it's in like I think it's like 110 or so. So it's
That's
not
nice.
too bad. Yeah. So it's not. It's kind of right in my sweet spot, in my opinion, right? Where it's not too boozy
Right.
to have such that ethanol sting, where it's not too watered down, where the body is compromised and it feels a bit too thin.
Nice.
So it's right in that middle for me.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I don't know if you'd say purist, but like I definitely prefer all of my spirits, whether they're bourbon or whatever, uh, cast strength. But I think anything in the 50 range, 50 to 60, is perfectly fine for me. I do find that in general, if I drink anything below 50 now, I you hit the nail on the head. It tastes thin.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting about proof, man. Like it's like I don't really care to have some 90 proofs, certainly not 80 proofs. Like it's not because I'm a snob. It's just because typically what that means to me is it doesn't deliver enough body,
Yep.
and what that oftentimes it doesn't enough deliver enough flavors for me.
I agree. I'm totally, and that isn't me somehow telling people that they need to be drinking stuff at a higher proof. It's just over time I've found for me that, like you said, it just is, there's not enough body. It does have a watered down character. It feels like you're not tasting the true essence of that spirit.
Mhm.
Yeah, cool, man. Is that it for you this week?
Um, yeah, I mean, I've had some. Oh, you want to talk about? Should I talk about a shitty drink that
Yeah,
I had?
absolutely. You should. We're
Sure,
gonna talk
talk
about
about
the good stuff, but we're also gonna talk about the bad stuff. I'm sure we're gonna get some questionable emails from distilleries and breweries, but this is
no, this we will never hear back from this brewery. Trust
all
me.
right. Perfect. That's
So,
that's my favorite kind of feedback. Then.
um, so what one of the things that I with my job that I enjoy is typically on Fridays, we'll get together with the team and then we'll have some some drinks, usually centered around beer. So, uh, one of my coworkers decided to crack open a Trimmer Pils that was at room temperature, that's been sitting at office room temperature, and then he
Wait,
poured
sorry.
me,
Just back up for a second. This is a pills that he's cracking at room temperature.
yeah, Trimmer Pils, yeah.
All right.
So he poured me a full glass, and then he's like, "Hey man, let's just chug this." And I was like, "Sorry, bro, I'm not a chugging type." Um, and So I took one sip, and then he poured one for himself, and then he chugged it, and I was like, no offense, Nate, that was fucking disgusting. Like, I don't know what the hell you thought about that, but anyways, that was my disgusting drink. But took one sip, and I was like, no, trash can, no more.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, this is not snobbery. It's just, I think, a different approach that, I have a no shots policy now because I'm not 20 years old anymore. I'm not interested in getting hammered. My goal is to, it's the same with food. I'm eating because I enjoy it, because it tastes good. So, to me, doing shots or chugging beer, it's like like, to me, that's not the whole point of why I'm doing that. Like, it seems like a waste of time and a waste of money, and I don't, and waste of alcohol tolerance that I could be spending on stuff that I enjoy. I don't get it.
No,
Not for me.
I agree. Yeah. Anyway.
Cool. Well, so I mentioned at the top of the show that I went to a whiskey tasting a couple weeks ago. For those who aren't aware, there's a great society called the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. They are one of many societies or groups out there that do independent bottlings. I think what makes them unique is that they go out and they seek casks from a distillery. So, if, I don't know who to pick out. I'll just say, I'm looking at the list. So let's say, Cragganmore. So that was one of the ones I had. So they'll go to Cragganmore and they'll say, look, can we taste a couple different casks? And really what they're looking for is to buy the entire cask of whiskey and then get it bottled for themselves. Now, because they're getting the bottling done through whoever, you can't put the name of the distillery on the bottle because the rules are, unless, this is probably, I think it's true of bourbon as well. If the distillery isn't bottling it themselves, you can't put the distillery name on there. So the way they get around that is they have codes, and then, there's this website that decode the code. That's not exactly a secret. So then you can say, okay, well, this is what the code. So the code is kind of two parts. The first part is the distillery. The second part is the number of casks that they've bought and bottled. So it kind of gives you a running tally. It's a big introduction to basically the experience. So I think what set this one apart is that normally it's all whiskey. Normally, they actually had a rum in there, which was kind of interesting this time because it was a cask strength rum, and I don't know that I've had the experience of having a lot of cask strength rum, so that was kind of interesting. And I'll get to that kind of halfway through because it was kind of halfway through the tasting. So first up on the tasting was 63.46, which was Glen Hawkess. It was a 10-year-old rum, or I'm talking about rum. 10-year-old whiskey. It was a refill bourbon hogshead, 206 bottles, 59.4% ABV. I'm going to talk ABV because my brain can't really factor proof. I know it's just math, but whatever. It was okay. On our sort of internal rating, I probably would have put it in the low sixes, like a 6.1 kind of thing. It had a lot of sweetness and it had some citrus quality, but it didn't have enough body for me. You know what I mean? Like there wasn't enough complexity on the spirit. I don't know if that's because of the age or the spirit or the cask or whatever, but didn't really float my boat. The next up, which was kind of along the same lines, but in a different way, was 7.203. So 203 casks. So they've done a lot of bottlings. This is a Longmorn. Same kind of deal. Is a 15-year. It was a second fill. So second fill bourbon cask, 56.5%. So a little bit gentler on the ABV and definitely tasted that way. It didn't have that sort of heat that the first one did. It was all right. I mean, it had some interesting citrus quality. It had some sort of briny sea quality to it. It didn't really, it was good, but it didn't really float my boat. Like it didn't blow my skirt up or anything. The whiskey of the night, which was not cheap, was a let me try that again, is a 37.105, which is a Cragganmore. And the nice thing about doing these tastings is you're doing them blind, so you don't know the age, you don't know the distillery.
Oh, nice.
Right? So I had this, gonna pat myself on the back. I had the age pegged because it's one of those things you taste it and you're like, number one, this is really old. Number two, this is really expensive. And I seem to have this uncanny ability to pick out the expensive bottles, which is expensive and damaging to my wallet. So this bad boy was 30 years old. 30 years old. This is cask strength 30-year-old whiskey.
Cask strength 30
cask
years old.
strength. Yeah, this is all cask strength stuff. So 57.2%. And I mean, it was good. I would have put this in the lowish sevens on the
Mm.
developing palate scale. Like this was really, really good. Unfortunately, it also had a price. I mean, it's a 30-year-old cask strength single barrel whiskey. So, she was $565, and that's, and we can talk about that in future episodes. That's a tough nut. $565, right?
Ugh.
Like,
Yeah,
how many bottles of bourbon can you get for like good, great bourbon for $565,
no,
right?
yeah, we could. It's interesting because this episode being our first episode, as we talk about these libations and what we're tasting and all of these thoughts flood through my head where I'm just kind of like, well, would I buy it? Is it worth it? Right. So like I automatically think when you say something like that, I'm like 30-year-old Scotch that is cask strength, right? Which is not easy to come by any means. And it's rare out there. That's
Super
just the
rare.
reality of it,
100%.
right? So, and usually 30-year-olds they proof it down to like usually typically that 90 proof or
Yeah.
so, right? Um, so if you're thinking about it, and if they were to proof it down, let's just say it's like 250 a bottle. But if you're getting basically cask strength, you're kind of getting the double the amount in a single bottle.
Really?
Is it worth the 500? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, great idea. I want to taste it first. I'm not about to buy the stuff blind. So
Well, I can definitely tell you that if it didn't end in divorce because of the number of bottles I already have in the house, and I had the money to just throw around for a $565 bottle, that would have been a no-brainer pulling the trigger. No brainer. Like it was, if I'm tasting a whiskey and it's in the sevens, that means that's a buy rating for me. Anything above a seven is like, I want this. And like you said, there's not a lot of 30. I mean, first of all, there's not a lot of 30-year-old whiskey out there. Number one, there's
right.
definitely very few cask strength 30-year-old whiskeys because it's economics, man. It's been in the cask for 30 years. They got to make some money.
Yeah, milk it.
Got
Yeah.
to milk it. So yeah, that was pretty close to the whiskey of the night. Shockingly, not the whiskey of the night for me, believe it or not.
Hmm.
The next up was a 12.10, and if I remember right, I think they said that they have not done a lot, like because it's .10, so they've only done 10 casks. This is from Ben Riach, and it was only an 8-year whiskey, so there's a lot. We can have a future discussion about the age of whiskey and people being snobs or whatever. This was phenomenal. I mean, this was, like stewed fruit and fall
Mm.
spices with this kind of underlaying smoke. And when I say smoke, some people were describing it as peat. I didn't really find it peaty. I found it, very smoky, sort of reminiscent of a Talisker or an Oban. So I think of that, I think of those qualities as smoke. And to me, it's that almost Kentucky Fire cured smoke, you know what I mean? Like it's that
Mm.
rich, juicy smoke as opposed to that really intense, almost acrid, tar type smoke. It was, I mean, it was probably, well, in fact, I'm gonna go out and say it. For me, it was the bottle of the night, 61.1%. And I would have put this in the mid sevens. So it just kind of checked every box for me. If you are a smoky peat whiskey kind of guy, yeah, and I don't think I have any Ben Riach in my collection. So yeah, that was a no-brainer. And then
That's
talking about rum, so it was an R. So R is I think one of their, well, rum I think is what it stands for. And this is the first bottling from this distillery. I don't know what distillery it is. I'd have to look it up. I didn't make note, but the rum distillers from Belize. It's a 12.1. It was a 10-year rum, which is pretty good for rum. 10 years at cask strength. Whopping 66.2%.
damn.
66.2. And I got to tell you, at 66.2, I could have found myself crushing a half bottle of this.
Damn. That's rum,
That's
right?
rum.
So that is a lot of residual sugar in there. Holy
Now
shit.
the
Boozy
yeah, boozy,
sweetness.
right? So what I found, because I'm not a fan of super sugary sweet forward rum, and for me, this kind of, I don't know how I'd describe it. Florida Cana tends to have more of a rum like a citrusy rum character rather than a sweet character, and I would say it was kind of somewhere between like a Dominican rum and Florida Caña. So you had a little bit of sweetness, but just enough to kind of add or round out that alcohol, that big alcohol punch. Anyways, $174. That's a lot of money for me to be dropping on rum. I don't know that I can drop that kind of cash on a rum.
Hey, they say the next wave is rum,
You think? You
so
think
we,
that's
we might be you might be eating those words in about a year
damn?
when we talk about this shit again. So,
Might be an investment bottle. I might have missed out.
uh,
Uh,
but no, that is very expensive for today's standards on
yeah,
rum.
yeah. And I would have
Yeah,
put it in the high sixes. So definitely really really good, but don't think I could justify that when there's so many good rums out there for a third the price. Granted, they're not
yeah.
cask strength, but there is a diminishing return for me, which is very very rapid for rum. Last two bottles, and then we'll get on to some of our news of the week. Getting into the peated category, like the more like true peated category, was a 93.93, which is a Glen Scotia. Again, this kind of would be in the really high sixes, almost sevens for me. 16-year rum, 16-year whiskey. I don't know why I keep saying rum. 55.8%, so pretty manageable by cask strength rating levels. It had just a really clean. So, and I say clean. So, if you're a peat guy, I thought this was an Ardbeg, and so I found the peat to be very balanced with the spices and the salt and all the other character going on here. Whereas, Lafroig, which I'll drink quite often, Lafroig to me is quite rough. It's very unbalanced. It's very peaty, but I like that when I'm in the mood for it. So she was good. I mean, this would have been kind of a buy bottle for me, especially at 16-year. ABV is pretty manageable, pretty tasty stuff. And then last up, kind of again, I think probably another bottle of the night, and this would be in the buy category, is a Bunnahabhain classic Islay whiskey, 10.119. I would have put this in the low sevens as well. 9-year. So again, kind of, some young whiskey, but really showing that young whiskey can be pretty spectacular. 59.3%. So she's a bit of a heater. And it was kind of that classic. I would really describe that as a classic Islay. I almost pegged it as a Lagavulin. So a lot of smoke, but a lot of character, a lot of balanced complexity in there. Spices, briny, seaweed, chewy, good stuff.
No, it's interesting. I remember when I first discovered Islay whiskey. Well, like most people's reaction is, "What is this? This is really gross." uh, and, but as you keep going back to it, it's such a unique style that also you have to be in the mood for, right? Because most days of the week, I'm not over here going, "Oh, let's get a pour of the Lagavulin 16," which I really enjoy. But like I probably haven't touched Islay whiskey like in almost 2 years, dude.
Wow.
Just because it's been like it no longer. I'm for some reason I think it's my drinking is very very seasonal,
Yeah.
right? Like I'll be on this bourbon kick and then I'll probably turn to something else and I'll go back to it. I just haven't went back to that full circle yet. But I could already tell us doing these shows, I'm gonna have to go back and start revisiting a lot of bottles that I haven't touched in a couple years.
I'm an enabler. It's what I do. I enable. Can't help it. All right. So this week in Pour and Tell industry news, kind of an interesting one if you're Canadian, because one of the things in Canada is that, and I think this is true of a lot of places in the States, anytime you have alcohol distribution within Canada up until recently, the importation and distribution had to go through a provincial source, so basically our state. Now, some of the provinces within Alberta or within Canada, pardon me, have a privatized system, but they still have provincial distribution, which is kind of a drag because, in not necessarily for external stuff like beer and whatever coming in from the States, but believe it or not, it's kind of a pain for interprovincial stuff. So, like, beer from Quebec takes a while to filter its way down, et cetera, et cetera. So all this to launch the news of the federal government is actually removing barriers to interprovincial alcohol. Essentially, what they're saying is that had to clear my throat there. Essentially, what they're saying is that they're going to remove the requirement for all that alcohol coming into the province to go through that distribution body. And what that means, the too long didn't read, stop talking, John, is I could call up a brewery, say one in Quebec, like Deux de Ciel or all the great breweries in Quebec, and say, ship me a flat or ship me a six or whatever, and they'll ship it directly from the brewery or wherever to my house. And that, as far as I'm concerned, that's great. I think that'll allow a little bit level of competition. It'll open things up for breweries to do some interesting stuff, or maybe they do one-off brews, and then they're not going to go through the trouble of getting out to the stores. Maybe what they're going to do is just whatever.
Yeah. Question for you. So, in the States, I think retailers and consumers alike are all for this direct model, but the distributors are a huge part of the end cycle, right, of getting it to ultimately to the consumer. So, do you know originally why we even had distributors for like alcohol?
I think it's a combination of taxes. Number one, I think taxes are always the number one cause of anything that is a barrier to individuals, right? And I think the other issue is, man, I don't know, whatever. I think it's just would you say an oversight of making sure that the way they're producing, whether it's a beer or a bourbon or whatever, is to the food and safety standards, so that you don't have people essentially making bathtub gin. But at the end of the day, it's taxes. It's all about taxes. If you follow
it's about taxes. It's a money generation kind of a thing. I get that, but I mean, that's a huge part of it, no doubt, and that's probably the biggest part, I assume. But nowadays with such a great tech-based culture we have, and freight like freight and everything, and POS systems and all that good stuff, like there's no reason to not have it directly from the brand owner / manufacturer to the end customer, right? So aside from the distributors and taxes and making money and all that kind of stuff, so I think that's great that you guys had that. I mean, speaking from purely a consumer standpoint, I would love to have that, right? Like to no longer basically go through these like mom and pop shops or like big box stores, and then essentially playing a distributor game, like of timing when things might come to California from, let's say, Kentucky,
or maybe it never comes. Like there's so many beers and stuff,
exactly,
right? Where it's like, well, the distributor's chosen not to bring that in. It's like, okay, well that's your prerogative. I would like to get it. So, and I would like to not have to drive 3 states over and then drive back.
Right. And like take Fieldwork that I was talking about earlier. Like they recently turned to the model of selling their cans for pre-sale events online, right? So you just order pre-sale events and you just go pick it up when they release it. They'll give you like a 3-4 window time frame to pick it up. So that would be great. And if we had softer laws in regards to shipping across state lines, we could really widely open this concept. A lot of beer, especially around here, they're going through like Eventbrite and different things like that for people to source it. So, it'll be nice to have that. I don't think it's going to be anytime soon or ever. There's just so much money and tax and everything involved. But
what can you do?
Freedom. Canada freedom.
Canada freedom.
Point one for Canada.
So we're running a little overtime this week. Still getting our shoes feet underneath us for pacing. So we'll be back next week with some more whiskey industry news, do some recaps of some of the reviews we've done on developing palates. Any final parting words for this episode 1, Jiunn?
Yeah. So John and I, we're gonna do this like once every other week or so. Um, Give us feedback. Let us know what you think. We're at the end of the day enthusiasts, and we just want to share with you kind of a little bit about ourselves and our habits and drinking, and some more widely distributed news out there, and just converse about this whole thing.
Absolutely. And you can find all of our contact information on developingpalates.com. That's where our show will be. And thanks for subscribing to the podcast. Of course, you can check out the YouTube if you really just want to see us looking at the screen and talking about booze. You can check us out on YouTube. You can leave a comment, give us a up, thumbs, whatever. Happy to have the interaction. So tip up a glass, and we'll see you next week.